So good afternoon, everybody. I know we have a global audience joining us here today, so good morning or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. And welcome to this webinar on how to get to net zero, how governments can deliver on their climate commitments. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, a publishing house that serves civil servants and public servants all around the world. And I'm also delighted to have with us here today our knowledge partner, Advanced Bacterial Sciences, or ABS. So in terms of today's topic, in a bid to tackle climate change and protect biodiversity, governments around the world have committed to a host of environmental targets, with many governments having committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions over the coming decades. 6 months on from the COP26 conference at Glasgow, our speakers today will look at the progress that countries are making in their plans to reduce carbon emissions. They'll look at what best practice is emerging around the globe, as well as looking at the barriers that are still hindering governments in their transitions to more sustainable futures. We have a really fantastic expert panel with us today, and in a moment I will introduce our 4 speakers. But this is also your opportunity as the audience to put your questions to that panel. So once we've heard some opening remarks from our speakers, there'll be an opportunity to answer as many of your questions as we can before the end of the webinar. So on whichever device you are using, you may be able to see a Q&A function. Please use that Q&A function at any time from now on to send in your questions. And as I say, we'll get through as many of those as we possibly can. So now to introduce our speakers. First, we will hear from Daniel Morris, who is the Clean Energy Senior Lead at the Climate Investment Funds at the World Bank. Daniel has spent nearly 15 years really pushing the frontiers of policy, economics, and finance to develop solutions to the climate crisis. And in his current role, he works with SIF partners to support innovative clean technology operations that can help developing countries on their pathway to zero carbon economies. Then we'll head over to Estonia to hear from Meelis Munt, who is the Secretary General at the Ministry of Environment in Estonia, where he's worked on climate change, radiation protection, and air quality since 2008. Meelis led Estonia's climate work during its presidency of the Council of the European Union, and it was thanks to his initiative and his leadership that an agreement was reached about the principles of climate policy on the European Union for the next decade. So it's really great to have Meelis with us here today. Then we will hear from Gareth Hughes from our knowledge partner. He's Chairman and CEO of Advanced Bacterial Sciences, whose treatments for waste and water management, pollution remediation, and agriculture boost efficiency, cut costs, and regenerate natural systems, all part of helping to address climate change and protect biodiversity. So Gareth has advised and invested in projects and funds across the natural capital spectrum, including clean energy, energy efficiency, water, waste, forestry, and agriculture sectors, and has driven the creation of climate change initiatives in a number of organizations. And last but not least, we'll hear from Sharon Burrow, who is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. So it's really great to have this perspective with us today, because Sharon works for the organization that represents 200 million workers in 163 countries and territories with 332 national affiliates. So the organization's primary mission is the promotion and defense of workers' rights and interests through international cooperation between trade unions, global campaigning, and advocacy within the major global institutions. And it's a really important part of ensuring that just transition as countries move towards their net zero target. So it's great to have Sharon with us here today. So as I say, please do send in your questions. As you can see, we've got a fantastic panel here today, but without further ado, I'm going to invite Daniel to give us his opening remarks. Over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Siobhan, for that introduction, and thanks to the Global Government Forum for bringing us all together for what will be, we hope, a lively and interesting discussion on a really important topic. As you heard, my name is Danny Morris. I am the Clean Energy Lead for the Climate Investment Funds. For those who don't know us, and with this crowd, I'm guessing there are a few who maybe haven't heard of us. We are a $10 billion fund that works on driving climate action through over 325 programs in 72 developing countries. Our business model works through 6 multilateral development banks. So you heard the World Bank mentioned as well. We are housed in the World Bank, but we don't represent the World Bank solely. We work with other MDBs in the regional areas, your African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, along with IFC, to the International Finance Corporation to provide large amounts of finance that is risk-bearing, patient, and available at below market rates to support projects across the entire suite of climate action, whether it be clean energy and energy efficiency, energy access, sustainable transport, resilience, forestry. We cover almost everything, or as much as we can with our available resources. The Climate Investment Fund's strategy has been to deploy concessional capital that is flexible, predictable, and capital focused in specific programmatic or thematic areas at scale, but targeted in ways that can tackle market and institutional failures and other barriers to climate action. So our business model delivers on this by bringing together the MDBs, helping them work together, facilitating a relationship with the country governments themselves. And this is where I want to talk about things that will hopefully be relevant to you all. We work to lower investment costs and risks and provide a collaborative platform for strategic and operational coordination. Now, we do that by enabling the MDBs by providing this concessional capital that can then facilitate them to bring their own capital in and to search for other co-financiers as well. So within our energy portfolio, where our work, we have a co-finance ratio of 1 to 10. Every dollar we bring in brings in $10 from other financiers. A third of that comes from the private sector. A third of that comes from the MDBs, but we also do get a lot of co-financing from national governments and bilateral aid institutions as well. So we use that to enable the MDBs to address barriers that prevent the commercialization of new technologies. We work to, as I said, engage private investors in sort of first of a kind projects and contribute to what we've developed we think we can achieve, which is called transformational change. And that's sort of a school of thought that we've worked with academics to help develop to better understand where our resources are having an impact. So the primary vehicle for all this is what we call our programmatic approach. And that is centered around developing country-led investment plans in thematic areas supported by MDB collaboration. So it's really a rigorous and collaborative planning process that through the programmatic approach ensures that our investments can effectively address countries' most pressing climate priorities as defined by them. That can lead to long-term changes in sort of the modus operandi of key government, civil society, and private sector groups that go beyond the life cycle of our funding. Factors such as clarity of mechanisms and country-level leadership really help dictate the effectiveness of our approach. We've been doing this for over a decade. The CIFs were founded in 2008 with the idea of figuring out how to help the MDBs learn how to do climate finance, and working closely with country partners has been a key aspect of that. We've been able to refine and learn from our approach. And with that, our work has sort of developed this line of study that I mentioned on transformational change. So, as we've been going along, we have a lot of interest from our contributors. I should say all our contributions come from sovereign governments. We have 12 or 13 contributors. They're all very interested in sort of what is the impact of their resources and how is this process working? How are developing countries moving forward to achieve their own goals? So a few years ago, we reached out and requested an independent assessment of what the programmatic approach looks like. And we wanted to have a clear-eyed view of how it's done over the past 10 years, 12 years. So the review found that our programmatic approach offered countries an organized way to prioritize investments, which I think is really key. It sort of became a rallying point for countries to come together and figure out the kind of things they want to do and allow them to develop a plan to pursue those. It also gave a platform for multilateral development banks to develop joint programming and a division of labor. If those, maybe some of you have worked with MDBs, some are quite skilled in some areas and not in others. This sort of gave them an opportunity to come together and focus on their strength areas and provide the best support for the countries that were developing these programs. And above all, one of the main findings that's really important is planning security. We have a set envelope of resources that countries know they'll be able to access, and they know that this envelope of resources can help leverage other resources, whether it's from their own budgets, the private sector, MDBs, what have you. It provides a level of certainty that allows them to move forward in pursuing activities within a focused area. So for our energy programs, I'll just talk about them real quick. We found that these investment plans resulted in evidence of system thinking that could lead to transformational change. They make clear statements of alignment with relevant national policies and strategies. So NDCs, 5-year energy plans, these investment plans were really set up to complement and sometimes buttress those plans. The investment plans also address multiple pathways of change and finding different opportunities countries can pursue and governments can pursue to achieve their goals. Usually it pursued low carbon technology development and emissions reduction opportunities in both the energy and power sectors and the transportation sector as well. As I said, the predictability of the resources, but also the flexibility of the resources is really a valuable feature of the programmatic approach. And that helps pave the way for different kinds of programming that can be more responsive to changing market conditions and government priorities. So once an investment plan is finished, countries can still come back and sort of look at emerging opportunities and try to pursue some resources to achieve that. I'll just give a quick example in one country before I wrap up. I like to go back to Kazakhstan, where the CIF invested about 64 million, which helped leverage more than 600 million in co-financing. We came in very early, I think in 2009 or 10, and had a hand in financing the country's first utility scale solar PV project and the first wind project. But before we did that, we provided technical assistance support that provided a key role in the development of the country's clean energy policies. So the policies were evolving along with the investments that we were able to support. So our funds, paired with funds from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and IFC, the International Finance Corporation, provide the support needed to help write the renewable energy development framework, model the social impacts of specific policies like feed-in tariffs, and establish the legal and regulatory framework for bankable renewable projects. So that's an example of what we've done in the past. I mean, moving forward, we have our focus sort of dead set on zero carbon goals in developing countries, and happy to talk more about that in the questions. Let me wrap up here with my initial remarks. And again, thanks all for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thanks so much, Daniel. A really great place to start with those presentations, because I think you've raised a lot of issues that will be picked up by the other speakers and will be of interest to the audience. But really interesting to hear how kind of you work to create those conditions that are good for other people then to come in with investments as well. So how you kind of facilitate that environment. But also I think what a lot of people will be interested in, the way you've kind of measured the impact of some of these investments. So for other people to come in and have kind of a bit more understanding of what the impact is going to be of that work, the importance that you stress of governments and country level leadership being key in a lot of these projects, the importance of collaboration there across different sectors, across different organizations as well. And then really nice to have that case study from Kazakhstan, as you said, not just investing in kind of solar and wind projects, but also in the technical assistance to make sure that's sustainable going forward. So thank you so much. Lots of food for thought there to unpick as we go forward. Maëlys, I'm going to come over to you now to give us your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And dear panelists, dear audience, good afternoon. And it's a really great pleasure to join via the video bridge from Estonia. I must say that I do have a lot to say, given that I'm the only one representing the government in this panel. And there is so much happening in Estonia, but I assume that this goes for each part of the world. But I'll try to focus in my introductory remarks to 4 points. Perhaps I would like to highlight what I see perhaps the most intriguing one from the government level, but at least these are the points I see as a valuable input to this panel discussion. Before I go to the topics, perhaps some key facts, what I would like to highlight in order to describe what will be the challenges for Estonia in order to become climate neutral and also to make this green transition really happen. First, this is some facts about Estonia. First of all, I would say that for Estonia, we have a very long time dependency on fossil fuel called oil shale. This is our domestic resource. This is carbon intensive fuel. And of course, in order to achieve the climate targets, we must do something with it in order to turn our economy from brown side to green one. So this is a challenge, definitely. Secondly, this oil shale industry is locating in a very concentrated area in Estonia, in northeast part of Estonia, close to Russian border. Of course, there are consequences in order to make this transition happen from oil shale industry to green industry. So, of course, the just transition and the socio-economic consequences of this part of the region are of importance to our government, and this really need to be addressed adequately and also fairly. The third one, of course, the digital transformation and the digital technology that Estonia is famous of. And we see a huge benefit to interlink the digital transformation with the green transition. And also the very vibrant startup community we have in Estonia. I got the number that I hope it is also valid today, but as I heard that there are the most startups and unicorns per capita as regards Estonia. So we see a lot of mutually reinforcing possibilities by interlinking the digital transformation with the green transformation. And of course, the forestry sector, given that we should not only talk about how to mitigate or how to decrease the emissions, but how to enhance the absorption of CO2 from atmosphere. So it is also important that the forestry sector and good land use management has a huge role to play in mitigating the climate change. So this is also something which I would I wanted to highlight in advance. But 4 points to make from government level. First of all, the tackling climate change and aiming at the green transition, this is a collective effort. This needs to be highlighted, that sometimes there are sayings that governments should be held accountable. They are responsible for achieving climate targets and so on, but these are collective efforts. Not the government solely, but we have to engage whole society, economic sectors, and so on. So, of course, the vision and targets are important, which are usually agreed at government level, but the action on the ground is what really matters. And as regards Estonia, yes, we have adopted a target to become climate neutral by mid-century. This is aligned with the whole EU target. And we have also now discussing the what will be the measures in order to meet our EU, but also the Estonia's target at least -55 by 2030. Currently, Estonia's our own emission reduction achievement is already 71%, so we are above the EU target. But of course, I acknowledge that most of that happened when the Soviet Union collapsed, and it impacted also the economy of Estonia. So, but what is important that each government could decide what path to choose, because there are certain specificities for each member state or a country. There is a unique or different background, history, structure of economy, so it needs to be accounted in. And therefore, it is important that governments have their own choice how to really decrease their emissions and how to pursue the climate neutrality. So my second point is that for Estonia, we see that energy transition has the most or the biggest role to play. As I said before, we have a historical dependency on oil shale, carbon-intensive fossil fuel. So in order to become climate neutral, we have to phase out from oil shale, and we have to find the alternatives for this energy resource. So this is a major task for the government at the moment. It is important that we will not rule out any alternatives. So we really discuss openly and transparently all the options on the table. So therefore, we are having a discussion whether to embark on a nuclear energy program. We are our major, or let's say our main aspiration is to hugely increase the deployment of renewables, wind and solar. We do have a great climatic conditions in order to have a much greater role of renewables in the future, both on onshore and also offshore wind parks. Perhaps a bit later at the panel, we could discuss what are the obstacles in order to make those new capacities on the ground faster, because there are some difficulties in order to pursue with that idea or this path. But also it is hugely important for the energy sector that the government vision and ideas and policies are predictable. This is a major concern for the industry, that sometimes they feel that the government does not have the enough predictability for the industry. And as you were saying, Siobhan, at the introduction, yes, we did agree on EU targets for 2030. It was during our presidency 5 years ago, but now we are already revising the targets. So it could happen quite swiftly to increase the ambition. So of course, this is has its consequences. So my third point, just transition, our region dependent on oil shale. We need to really, in addition to how increase the competitiveness, but we have to really tackle the issues of vulnerability of this region. So no one's really left behind, because in this region there is higher income for people working in oil shale industry, but at the same time there is much higher unemployment rate as well. So the transition must be fair. And my last point regarding the digital transformation and green transformation are mutually reinforcing. We have launched a deal. This is a Data for Environment Alliance, which was launched by our Prime Minister at COP 26. So this is really a platform in order to take together the different participants, member states or governments, in order to enhance the technological capability to address the the environmental concerns and how to improve the collection and management of environmental data. So this is a platform which we hope that really can deliver. So perhaps these were my opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Melis. As you say, as a kind of representative of a national government, there's so much that you could cover, and the topic is so broad. But I think some of the key points there are really interesting that you said. Even though Estonia, for example, in the EU context, every country has its unique kind of journey and its unique challenges, so needs to develop that works for them. Interesting to hear about your specific transition there from kind of oil, shale to renewables, but then also some of those questions around nuclear, which the audience might be interested in. And some of the things you highlighted that are important: certainty for business going forward, for investors going forward. And then you mentioned as well, which Daniel, and I'm sure Sharon will come back to, this idea of having to make sure it's a just transition, fair for people who are going to be impacted, in particular the most vulnerable, and bringing together, as you say, the data, the digital and technology, and the roles that that all plays in that greener future going forward. Thank you so much, Melis. Again, loads of stuff to cover there. Gareth, I'm coming over to you now.
Thanks, Siobhan. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Advanced Bacterial Sciences, which essentially is we are designing bacterial formulations that do what nature does, but turbocharge it. Nature is incredible in what it can do, but with all of the problems that we're facing today, there isn't enough time and we need to help it. Next slide, please. It's very easy to feel overwhelmed, to feel depressed, and to feel extremely concerned about the existential threats which we're facing from climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. We do have solutions, however, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things which we're doing using, say, natural bacterial products that are non-toxic and non-pathogenic. Just if you can look at this list here, you can see just a snapshot of the damage that we are doing, and the cost to clean this up is incredibly high, not just from an energy perspective, but across the whole spectrum of what is needed to done to mitigate and to avoid these things happening going forward. Next slide, please. So what are we doing at ABS? Essentially, we are taking a scientific approach to the treatment of waste. And it's not just the treatment of waste, it's also trying to find ways that we can regenerate resources from that waste. So we turn the waste into an asset. So we come at this, we have 12 scientists at the moment at our headquarters up in Lancaster. We will have 50 within a couple of years. And the intention is to create a sort of a global think tank, a center of excellence to really work out how we can accelerate the change required to solve many of these problems. So we are combining environmental science with combining molecular biology, chemical engineering, applied microbiologicals, as well as water engineering. And it's that sort of holistic approach to what we're doing, which creates the insights that we call the intelligent design. There are many biological solutions out there. Many of them are enzymatic. They can do certain things, but they're just not effective enough. So what we're trying to do is to find the right solutions for the right problems. Next slide, please. I'm going to very quickly just give you a few examples of areas where we are already solving problems with first generation products. So this is a product we designed called UriZap. Essentially, nowadays with the transition of many washrooms to waterless urinals, whilst it's good in saving water, it creates its own problems. There is not enough water to flush through the systems. You get this buildup of uric acid. That incurs cost to sort out blockages, to sort out repairs if things break. And using natural solutions like the bacterial approach we're designing are much more effective, and they're cleaner and they're cheaper. So everything we're doing is both good for the wallet and good for the environment. Next slide, please. This is showing the demonstration of how we treat fats and olefins and greases. Many kitchens, many restaurants have grease traps. These get very blocked up very quickly. bacterial solutions can break down and digest what to them is food and to us is waste. You can see here, over a 6-week period, a very blocked grease trap to a basically clean water. And this is what's happening. You know, the current methodologies are expensive. To replace blockages is also complicated, expensive. And all of these things, every time you're getting a track out to solve a problem, or you're using energy to pump water around the system, you're increasing emissions. With our solutions, we're reducing water, we're reducing waste, we're reducing emissions, reducing energy. It's clean, it's effective. Next slide, please. There are many problems with hydrocarbons, runoff from vehicles in particular. One of our solutions will break down hydrocarbons in situ. You can see on the left here, and after 6 weeks, a 90% reduction in hydrocarbons. Again, a bacterial, non-pathogenic, non-toxic formulation achieved this very quickly. We're working on environmental risk assessments at the moment to make sure that there are no unforeseen consequences of having treated the hydrocarbons. We're releasing other sort of metals and minerals. We believe that not to be the case. But again, these are cost-effective solutions. Next slide, please. One of the biggest problems we're seeing today, and this is a global issue, is there is so much nitrates and phosphates running off from agriculture into our water systems. They basically cause eutrophication, which kills animal life, pond life, and very quickly builds up. We're working on solutions today to denitrify these water bodies, which also will prevent N2O getting into the atmosphere, which is a 300-time, obviously, carbon emitter. Next slide, please. This isn't just about promoting ABS. This is about nature-based solutions. We and other companies, this is a $1 trillion problem. So, you know, there is loads of scope, loads of room for many companies here. But you can see, just taking this 9 boundaries approach, how effective nature-based solutions can be in dealing with biogeochemical issues, freshwater issues, biosphere integrity, climate change. There are so many things that we can do, and that is encouraging. So we have the technology, we can make it work. It needs joined up thinking. Next slide, please. Again, with SDGs, if you look in the middle, you can see the contribution that nature-based solutions can make to nearly all of the SDGs. And this is so encouraging and so exciting. Next slide, please. The Earthshot Prize, which was first launched last year, it's all about repairing our planet. There are very ambitious goals out there around protecting, restoring nature, cleaning our air, reviving our oceans, building a waste-free world. Nature-based solutions can do all of this at different amounts and at different speeds. But again, we have the solutions. Next slide, please. So really what we're saying here is we have an opportunity through what we're doing and others are doing to treat these issues of pollution, to manage them before they become a problem, and to recapture some of those elements that can be recycled back into the system. What we really do need, however, is joined up thinking. I've spent 20 years on the sort of bleeding edge of transition to low carbon and across a range of different sectors. This biological damage, this impact on the environment, this causing of greenhouse gases is something that we can change. Nature-based solutions can treat nearly 1/3 of the climate impacts between now and 2030. This is massive. They can be effective, they are competitive. So there's no need to trade off between an economic cost and an environmental benefit. And that's the wonderful thing about nature. So what we're really saying is we have solutions, the problems that we can solve, we need to accelerate this process at scale. And what I would love to see is how we can really take what we're starting today in the UK and take that globally. And I'm looking for your support to help us to do that. Thank you, Siobhan.
Thanks so much, Gareth. I mean, really interesting, because Miley started his presentation by saying governments can't do this alone. You know, this is everybody's task to do this. And I think what you've given us is a real snapshot of kind of your organization and how you're tackling this, but also really a glimpse to the future, I think, as we look to businesses that take a more, as you say, nature-based solutions approach, moving away from approaches that have been very polluting in the past. And as you say, there are benefits all around, good for the environment, good in terms of reduced costs as well. But very much there, I like what you say, your call to action to governments and to civil servants who are in the audience is, let's stand back and take a holistic approach. So make sure you're joining up those agenda of biodiversity, climate change, pollution, all those things really need to come together if we're going to tackle this with the pace that is needed. So thank you so much, Gareth, for that. Really, really interesting. And last but not least, Sharon, we are coming over to you. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, and I'm delighted to indeed join you. What a great breadth of the panel you have for what is probably the biggest challenge we face, certainly at the centre of the convergence of crisis that the world faces today. The honest truth is we're running out of time, though. You heard the Minister, we have to set those milestones for 2030. It may be fine to commit to net zero by 2050, but if we don't do more than half the job by 2030, we won't have a hope of stabilising the planet. And for working people, this means all sectors have to transition. So of course we coined the phrase and fought for just transition, which is included in the Paris Climate Agreement, but it's in fact very simple as a concept. It means that you have to put people and the planet at the heart of our solutions. Because the reality is, if people don't feel secure, if they see their communities decimated, if families lose jobs and they see no hope for their children and grandchildren, then you get the resistance that is not going to be helpful at the speed and scale we have to move. We've already lost too many years with climate denying, with the lack of ambition from governments, from corporations, the ambivalence that says if we just don't worry about it, it'll take care of itself. It won't. And right now we face a convergence of crisis. For working people, inequality, historic levels of inequality are generating extraordinary insecurity and resentment, even a loss of trust in many of our democracies. At this point in our history, we have less than 20% of people live in truly free nations. And that's very, very difficult then to put the partnerships together across business, across unions, communities where it's about community renewal and government. But we have to maintain the commitment to do just that. I was very struck by Gareth's presentation, because if we can do more than 30% of the job with natural solutions, then that actually means that nature itself can be healing and healed. But there are jobs in that. We know that every dollar you spend, there are jobs in this environment. So when you look at that inequality, when you look at insecure and underemployment, as well as unemployment in too many parts of the world, and when you marry that with investment in climate action, we have a saying, there are no jobs on a dead planet. So we have to invest in climate solutions, and we have to invest in the jobs that can be created for the future. Of course, we also have the convergence in this multi-crisis environment of a global health crisis. And I'm sure Gareth would tell you and others that if you break down the natural environment, if biodiversity is lost, then in reality, you are allowing the risk of further pandemics, because we are breaking down those natural barriers that protect nature and protect human beings. The resulting health crisis, which people have been warning about for more than a decade, is now something you can't ignore. And of course, we've got now the spikes in prices, the inflationary price hikes for energy and food. All of these mean you have to put people and planet at the heart of it. So what does just transition mean? It means people can't be left behind. Communities have to be renewed. And there's simple measures. If you are a government, then you have to generate the kind of climate plans that mean that we're looking towards the environment. In fact, climate laws are what we support, where the environmental targets, the government procurement power, everything is actually directed at those solutions, but it has to be with people at the heart of that too. So what does it mean if there is displacement? And there will be displacement in some industries. You means pensions, secure pensions for older workers. It means for younger workers that income support, while reskilling support and redeployment support kicks in, is essential. So people have confidence that, you know, universal social protection as a floor, but also income support at the level that people are now earning. It means good jobs in the transfer. The Estonian minister talked about the just transition required in their shale oil region. But, you know, there are jobs in renewable energy. For every 10 jobs in renewable energy, there's 5 to 10 in manufacturing. If they're good jobs, there's 30 to 35, indeed, in the broader community. That's how you retain investment in communities, build economies, but it has to be planned for. So we would say to government, what is your role? Your role is, first of all, to make sure that you have the ambition in place. Those national NDCs, they must have just transition in them. They must be ambitious, the commitments made. But it's not enough to go to a climate conference and make those commitments. They have to be put into government policy. Indeed, we would argue government legislation. And that legislation has to have just transition at its heart. And the final element of just transition is, of course, to leave no communities behind. We've seen too many transitions where communities have been devastated. And that's why you don't get the trust from people. Having unions at the heart of the discussion means that those just transition measures can be part of the ambition. And then unions will promote with their members, with workers generally, the kind of good jobs in new sectors, I should say, of industries. Because people often think industries will disappear, Rachel, but in fact, the industries of today are largely the industries of tomorrow. You will have energy, you will have construction, transport, agriculture, services, pick an industry. It will be there in some form, but the jobs and the technology may change. And people forget that heavy industry has to transition as well. But we're already seeing clean steel. And if you take the Swedish example, then while you lose some jobs in the processing area, hydrogen creates more jobs, and that's what's required, green hydrogen for the intensity of the heat. It means reskilling. Automotive is hard, but again, if you look at the manufacturing supply chains and join the dots between manufacturing, whether it's automobiles or whether it's in fact electricity from clean energy, then we can find jobs for people, particularly our younger people, to move into. The real challenge is, and again, the Estonian minister said it, are they going to be good jobs? Are they going to be good union jobs that pay just wages? And the answer is they have to be, if you're going to build trust. We cannot get to the future on exploitation. We have to get to the future with a just approach to work, to climate, and indeed to building economies that are sustainable. And my final point here is that there are levers. One of the levers is government procurement. The other lever is indeed corporate procurement. In Europe, CBAM will make a difference because it won't just set the foundations for the way you do business in sustainability terms, what are the standards in Europe. It will actually set the foundations for people who want to trade in and out of Europe. If you actually look at corporate procurement, then again, corporations who are serious shouldn't be purchasing or engaging in contractual relationships in supply chains with anybody who's not meeting the same standard. And investment, every dollar, euro, unit of currency must indeed be ESG compliant. If we don't have environment and social standards, then again, people will not trust. So it is about jobs, jobs, and jobs. It's about investment that creates those jobs and the sustainability of industries for the future. And where are the big areas we can make a difference? You just heard, indeed, Gareth, but also cities. If you apply solutions in cities, 45% of the emissions, the bulk of the population, if we invest in cities, we also get the demand and supply curves, both within and across the hinterlands, whether it's in the same country or globally. And finally, multilateralism. If we don't reform multilateralism, if global trade is not based on indeed human and labour rights and environmental standards, we're not serious about a model of sustainability that's inclusive, that actually deals with that multiple area of crisis and generates the trust and the support for the scale and the speed at which we have to move to indeed save our only home, the planet we live on.
Thanks, Sharon. I mean, there's one sentence that really struck me in everything that you said. There's so much in what you said there, but we cannot get to the future on exploitation. I think that's such a great kind of sentence that sums up a lot of what you said there. I love what you said, a call to action for governments to be more ambitious, but in doing that, they have to have the just transition at the heart of everything they do, putting people and the planet at the heart of their solutions. And that needs to be credible to translate into real policy and legislation to show its credibility. And that real sense, which so many of you have picked up on in your presentations, of do not leave communities behind, especially the most vulnerable. And then jobs, jobs, jobs. I love this kind of busting the myth, because I think a lot of people will be scared as they go to a greener future that they're going to lose jobs, but actually there are good jobs to be had in this greener future. Thank you to all of you for such great opening presentations. We've got lots of questions coming in from the audience. We've got lots from Mali Kwamina, who I think is based in Trinidad. And I will make sure, because some of them are very specific, I'll make sure that if we don't answer all of those now, we get some answers to Mali afterwards, because they're directed at particular people on particular issues. But before we go to more of the audience questions, I just want to ask one myself, because this came up in, I think, some of the things that several of you mentioned, which is these targets and these commitments for countries were always going to be challenging, but the world is a very kind of tumultuous place at the moment. You mentioned the pandemic, price spikes, you know, the war in Ukraine, all of those things. How are these kinds of big issues affecting governments' abilities to stick to their targets and to keep climate change on the top of the political agenda? Daniel, I'm going to come back to you because we haven't heard from you for a while. And surely things like the war in Ukraine and kind of the, you know, cost of living crisis around the world, that's going to make things really hard, isn't it, in particular for developing countries?
Yeah, absolutely, Siobhan. Ukraine, I mean, focusing on that, that's one of our biggest beneficiary countries. We have in Ukraine 12 projects, 339 million of our financing, which is leveraged 3.4 billion in co-financing, work in renewable energy installations, energy efficiency and district heating. We had a brand new project with battery storage that was going to help the country integrate into the European grid that was approved back in early 2021. And Ukraine was also the top-ranked country in a new program that we're launching, which was focused on renewable energy integration and really trying to help governments tackle this issue of the bottlenecks in the grid, and can grids handle intermittent renewables. So on top of the tragedy that the war is, and the devastation that you know, war is in and of itself, and for the people of Ukraine, it's a missed opportunity to really advance an ambitious agenda in the clean energy space. You know, and I think it has larger implications beyond sort of the immediate responses. All of you, I'm sure, are familiar with your government responses of not only, you know, in some countries in Europe and North America, sort of funneling a lot of aid toward Ukraine, potentially at the expense of other types of interventions. I know for a fact that we've had a couple of our contributor countries say they can't give us as much as they would have liked because that foreign aid is being directed towards Ukraine. There's also the broader market implications and sort of this move toward natural gas as a short-term solution. But it's important to recognize that these short-term solutions have long-term consequences. And installing new natural gas infrastructure is potentially a 30-year investment at a time where our time is limited. We have until the end of the decade to get on the zero carbon pathway. And if we're focused on ramping up in fossils, what implications does that have for other regions, right? And then looking to sort of benefit from that, right? It's not just Europe, it's North American markets, it's potentially African markets, and the reverberations that has all the way through. The pandemic is also, we have these shocks, and sometimes there's, I guess people go back to what they know, and they go back towards what makes them feel safe. And if your investment strategy and development strategy over decades has been support with fossil fuels and dabble in renewables every now and then, you're liable to fall back on that. At the beginning of the pandemic, our CEO in the CIF was really pushing very hard for people to think of this as an opportunity to double down on green economy and zero carbon pathways, and really take the sort of resources that were coming forward and the support that people needed toward not only transition towards zero carbon, but as Sharon so eloquently talked about, the just transition that supports people in place and what they need and things like that. So, I mean, I think the opportunity still exists, but it can be a little, what's the word? I guess you can feel a little hesitant that we'll get there, or maybe not as optimistic as you would hope when you see people doubling down on what we've been doing. So I think that just requires more energy and effort from those in positions to help influence those bureaucracies to double down on really getting us on that pathway.
Thanks, Daniel. And Maëlys, I'm going to come to you, Maëlys, on this similar question, the same question really, about how do these big issues in the world affect a government's ability to keep this as a priority? And I'm going to link that to a question from Robin Simpson that's come in, who's put it in a slightly different way. Robin has said, the results of the Australian election are cause for celebration from a climate perspective. Now, I know we don't want to get political today, but I think the point is sometimes different administrations take a different approach to climate change. So again, it's a similar thing, is how can you make sure that electoral cycles don't get in the way of keeping this at the top of the agenda? So from Estonia's point of view, obviously the war in Ukraine, very, very, significant for you. But so this issue of just how do governments keep this at the top of the agenda?
Yes, thank you for this question. And indeed, well, of course, there have been very polarized views, and which also affects the government to stand up to these challenges. Of course, it really depends on the electorate. I think there is not much you can do. It depends on the political party, who is your electorate, and of course, there are in Estonia, for example, our government, very luckily, they are very proactive. They are very future-looking, and of course, when this brutal attack on Ukraine started, there were weeks when we also among ourselves thought, okay, what will now happen, or what is the government position on green transition, our climate goals, and so on. And but of course, after the time, weeks, months later, the government took a very strong decision that green transformation, green transition, energy security must be obtained. This will remain our focus. Of course, what is happening in Ukraine, this is brutal. There are so many implications for whole Europe, for Estonia. But despite that, the government, at least in Estonia, has taken a very strong position. we will aim at our climate neutrality, we have to be ready, we have to tackle, we have to do our utmost we can do in order to avoid those future crises. It was the case for when the pandemic started, now the war in Ukraine. It also indicated that the government is more than ever ready to take bold and show the determination to tackle the crisis, but also to be more prepared for future crises. And what makes it difficult, of course, are the groups of society, given the high rate of inflation, the increasing energy prices. And of course, there are societies and therefore some parties who are advocating that please now stop the ideas of Green Deal, green transition. But they forget the fact that the dependency on imports regarding gas and oil, the consequences might be much more severe. The green transition, the idea of circular economy, these are exactly the measures and policies what could take us away from these dependencies on foreign trade, on foreign imports, and fulfill the needs of our society by our own resources. And what is really happening is the huge willingness at government level to deploy the renewable energy. This is huge. I've never noticed a willingness at government level to really make those renewables in place so quickly, much faster than ever before. So we have really taken so much forward all the investments to renewables. So I think the crisis has shown that we must be more prepared for future crises than ever before.
So it's increased the pace of change.
Exactly.
Thanks. Gareth, you wanted to come in on this one, I think.
Yeah, and one of the biggest challenges we have is sourcing the metals and minerals that will enable this transition. And China controls over 90% of the actual production and the processing, okay? I ran a survey back end of last year, 2,000 international global investors, asking, about their level of interest in investing in mining operations for these critical things. 350 responses, only 20 actually said they would have some interest, and only one of those then took a meeting with the fund that I was talking to at that particular time. And I think that if we don't address this now, there is no way we're going to get to those targets. Okay, and just what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Gareth. Sharon, did you want to add anything on this issue of how do governments keep this at the top of the agenda with so much else going on?
Well, I think it's at the centre of the agenda. If you take the current, real threats to people's cost of living, then it's a cost of living crisis. How do you deal with that? We have enough food in the world to deal with the food security issues, and they're real. We just have to share it. We have to be prepared to actually keep the supply chains open, to make it possible for people to survive with dignity. We have enough money in the world. This pandemic, if you looked at Oxfam's figures this week, released here in Davos, more than $450 billion richer, the people who are at the heart of control of our energy and commodity, very small groups of monopoly power actually controlling the resources people need. So it is a matter of what kind of model of economy do we want? What kind of global solidarity are we prepared to engage in? Now, you can't be naive. The geopolitical divide is indeed going to be worrisome for some time. And Gareth just touched on that in terms of, the minerals that we need. But there are other sources, and there's also the circular economy and the advances in innovation that is made in reuse, reuse of materials. This is a time for the world to go faster. I'm so happy to hear the Minister say that, because if we don't go faster, then we are not actually serious about the the situation that we're in, and we're actually denying our children and grandchildren a secure future. But we must go faster with a solidarity that says, what kind of global environment do we want? How do you put people and planet at the heart of effective multilateralism, effective corporate trade, and, you know, effective governments, full stop?
Thanks, Sharon. I'm going to turn to some of the questions from the audience now again in particular. So Daniel, there's one here for you in particular. It came in from, I think it's Nahia Tran, who has said, I work with many SMEs in the climate and tech decarbonisation sectors that potentially can contribute a lot to the net zero ambition. However, it's sometimes hard for them to access World Bank or MDB projects. What would your advice be for these SMEs? Is there a department or an organisation that can take proposals from them? So essentially, how do SMEs get in touch with this kind of work?
Yeah, it can be a challenge sometimes. There are times where the MDBs get very focused on scale themselves, right? And there can be an emphasis on big projects with a big bang, and that leads SMEs behind, which is unfortunate because they can be a really catalytic force in climate action. One of our more successful programs was a fund that we helped support in Turkey that essentially set up it was a pool of resources that could be accessed by local banks. We provided them with those resources and training to help them figure out how to do lending for energy efficiency projects in homes and small businesses. We did that with EBRD as well, and it ended up supporting over 50,000 homes to do climate-friendly improvements. So it was a really successful thing. The advice I can give is keep a lookout for those opportunities. And if you do make contacts with the multilateral development banks, be a salesperson, hassle them and say, where are the opportunities that are there? We ourselves, we're considered a financial intermediary fund. So we don't originate projects. All our projects are originated with the MDBs. So unfortunately, I can't say, send me your prospectus, but what you can do is kind of hassle and say, we know there are funds out there, help us find where we can get them. And then, you kind of work your way through the machine.
A real persistent kind of old school approach, just keep going.
Exactly. Phone calls work.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Maëlys, there's a question for you, come from Eric Huberdeau, who has said, you spoke of the need for a collective effort and ensuring a predictable investment environment for business. How has the government of Estonia been able to bring together multiple sectors in the decarbonisation world? So for example, like in transportation. So what does it take to convene all of these sectors and bring people together? Could you share some lessons from Estonia?
Yes, thank you. What is the role of the government? It has been mentioned several times that we have to show the ambition, and we have to be credible, and we have to be consistent on our doings and our activities. Indeed, transportation is a very good example that there are so many different modes and alternative fuels available in the future in order to tackle or to become more green. Like we are having measures in place in order to introduce green hydrogen in Estonia. We have already in place measures in order to increase the use of biomethane mainly in lorries or coaches or buses. In transport sector, there are companies saying that we should use more second generation biofuels, but at the same time, there are hydrogen producer suppliers saying that the biofuel is the history. Let's now focus on real technology, on hydrogen and so on. And it is really, I admit this is not easy at all for the government to put together a kind of a roadmap how you can really absorb the ideas of each sector or each individual company. Our idea has been that perhaps, I don't know whether it has been useful or a kind of a delivering, but we have this kind of a technology neutral approach in all sectors, either it's in energy or in transport, that we are trying to set the ground for investors by saying that, okay, either we have this amount of money or our ambition is the following, and everyone who could fit to these main criteria could apply for either the finance or are able to provide their technology. So we are trying to keep this climate neutrality. And it has kind of opened the debate that we are not kind of excluding anybody in those discussions. But that's a fair question. That's so difficult for the government. And by engaging the sectors, by providing the ground where to apply for the investments, this has been, this kind of broad engagement has been the way. But of course, perhaps I am not the right person to say have we succeeded or not, but at least to some way we have kind of managed to hold this situation together.
It's a nice honest answer. You've done a lot, but there's still probably more that can be done, I think, going forward. Gareth, I'm going to put this one to you from Alpa Baxi, who said, why are we not getting scientists involved to invent ways to help with the climate? I mean, obviously you've got a science-based, a science-led approach. Do you think there's more that scientists could be doing to play a role in this? They've mentioned here, for example, nanotechnology that can destroy huge rubbish dumps, films showing how technology can be used to do more of this stuff. And I think Marley as well from Trinidad said they were interested in what you said about waste management and waste disposal as one of your examples and how that might be helpful in Trinidad. So my other question is, are you already working with governments on some of your solutions to actually green their own estates, their own kind of waste management and their own operations?
Number of questions there.
Yeah, sorry, there's a lot in there. I'm conscious we're running out of time.
Yeah, and absolutely, we need the best brains out there, scientific, but also from a sort of AI perspective as well, in order to accelerate what we're doing. There's lots of work going on. A lot of it is academic and academic papers, and they get peer reviewed, etc. But what we're trying to do is to create a concentration of talent that you can bring the different thought processes together. That will accelerate change much more effectively than trying to do it in a silo-centric way. So we are linking up with a number of universities in the UK, but we're looking to go international to bring all that thinking together. Absolutely. So more science, the better, because we are scratching the surface of our understanding of what nature can do. There are lots of potential technologies that can and will be developed to do a range of things. Thinking in the agricultural space, improving the effectiveness of slurry by bacterial enhancement in helping the plants to absorb more of the nutrients, so you need to put less on and then less gets wasted. We're looking at solutions that will increase the methane fraction in AD plants to get more out of the waste that's going in, but also capturing the key elements coming out of the back end of that. There are lots of different things that we can do working with nature. So phosphates is a huge issue. Bacteria can absorb the phosphates, but you need to be able to capture it. But these are all things we're looking at. Waste in terms of landfills, etc. Absolutely, it's already happening. But we need to industrialize that process, and we need to accelerate the whole approach on that.
Thanks so much, Gareth. Literally, I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. I'm just going to throw one more question, I think, at each of you and ask for a very short answer to those questions. But thank you to the audience for sending in such great questions. As I say, if we can't get them all answered today, I'll make sure that they get passed to the relevant people behind the scenes. So you should get an answer anyway. And also just to say from me, before we do these final responses to the audience, you might get a questionnaire from us. It will be in your inboxes. I'd be hugely grateful if you take a few moments to fill that in, just because it makes sure we can keep providing you with the webinars that are most useful for you in your position. So thank you from me in advance for that. So let me see, Daniel, I think there's another question in for you, just a very quick answer here from Louise Baker. Does CIF have any programs or technical assistance focused on the role of digital in the green transition?
So we do have a technical assistance facility that is sort of accepting applications for mini projects, you know, kind of small scale funding on a rotating basis. I think our third call for proposals will be going out in the next few months. So we don't have a mandate to focus on digital. It's not something that is a huge part of our agenda, but we're always open to good ideas. And if they can become, you know, promising areas of development and complement some of the work that's going on with the MDBs, we're certainly open to it. So that would be the way forward on digital.
Thanks, Daniel. Maëlys, there was a question for you saying the Paris Agreement calls on countries to deliver their nationally determined contributions, NDCs, every 5 years. Are you using the Climate Watch NDC Enhancement Tracker to help your country with its commitments?
I'll be frank, I haven't followed this one, but I'm more than confirmed, or that's more than sure that my colleagues definitely have my people working with climate targets and climate action. So I'm pretty sure they have. I admit I haven't taken this one as a kind of this tracker as a tool for me, but I'm more than sure that my colleagues definitely have done that.
Thanks, Maëlys. Gareth, not really a question for you, but just a comment that has come in. I love your solutions and technology and stand ready to work and help you. Introduce you to Sid. So I'm not quite sure what that is, but we'll make sure that we follow up with you afterwards. But did you want to have any final comments, Gareth, on anything that's been said today?
We have the solutions. We just need the political will to give us the sort of roadmap to get there. The market will work, but we really don't have much time. So adaptation is going to be as important as mitigation, but we can do both.
Thanks, Gareth. And Sharon, I'm going to come to you for final thoughts. I think the question I want to put to you, which has come in, is ultimately, who will hold governments to account if they don't meet their commitments on the climate and they don't make sure that the just transition is at the heart of those commitments?
Well, I think you know the answer to that. It's people. I mean, people will vote with confidence or they'll vote with anxiety. The deep anxiety and distrust that exists in the world right now, the Edelman Barometer Trust told us this week that the poorer 20% simply have lost all trust in authority. So we need to rebuild that trust, equally as we need to maintain and go faster in terms of re-establishing the answers for not just sustainability of climate, as critical as that is, but sustainability on a broader front in terms of greater equality, in terms of jobs, of social protection, of decent work. Those sustainable development goals can only be achieved if we're working in an integrated way. And I think I've really enjoyed listening to the panel. So thank you very much. It gives me heart to know that people and planet are on many people's minds, not just our own.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Well, we have actually come to the end of our time today. I have to say that was one of the most interesting conversations that I had on this topic. Because of you, the brilliant panel, I think you brought such diversity of perspectives and diversity of thought to that conversation. So thank you so much to Daniel, to Gareth, to Maëlys, and to Sharon for lending us your time and your expertise today. Thank you also to Advanced Bacterial Sciences for being our knowledge partner again today. And just to say to the audience, there is on the screen, you should see there, if you enjoyed today's conversation and you want to take part in our next sustainability webinar, the details are up there. It will be titled Policy for 1.5%, What Governments Can Do to Tackle Climate Change, 1.5 degrees, sorry. And that will be on the 11th of October. So you can register for that as well. But that just leaves me to say there will be a link sent to everybody who registered today with the video. You can watch it all again if you want to, but also share it with your colleagues. And we will also be circulating an article with all of the key issues that were raised today. That will come round in a couple of weeks' time to everybody. Thank you to the audience. Thank you again to our panel. Wherever you are in the world today, enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you on another one of our webinars very soon. Thanks everybody, and goodbye. Thanks so much.